It happened at 7:42 p.m. on a Friday evening in the private drawing room at Windsor Castle, during what was supposed to be a routine family dinner ahead of the annual Diplomatic Corps reception. William and Catherine had requested the gathering, not as heirs, not as future sovereigns, as son and daughter-in-law. They had asked for no staff to be present, no recording devices, no official minute-taker, just the four of them, Charles, Camilla, William, Catherine. And when the doors were closed and the first course had been cleared, William placed a single unmarked cream folder on the table between his father and stepmother. He did not speak. He did not explain. He simply placed it there with the quiet, deliberate certainty of a man who has spent 2 decades preparing for this exact moment. Charles looked at the folder. He did not open it. He did not need to. His face went still, not the practiced stillness of public composure, but the deeper, more terrible stillness of a man recognizing a reckoning he has outrun for half a century. And beside him, Camilla's face said everything. Not shock, not anger, not denial, recognition, the slow, dawning recognition of a woman who has always known this day would come, who has prepared for it in silence, who has carried its weight alongside her husband's, and who now understood in the space between one breath and the next that the carrying was over, that the secret was no longer theirs to hold, that William and Catherine had finally, irrevocably, brought it into the light. Before we reveal what was in that folder, the document, the correspondence, the institutional record that Charles has spent his entire reign ensuring would never see daylight, before we walk through the conversation that followed, the words that were spoken and the silences that spoke louder, and before we describe how this exposure reshapes not just Charles's legacy, but the foundational narrative of the modern monarchy, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is not about scandal, it is not about betrayal, it is not about exposing a king to diminish him. It is about a truth that has lived in the shadows of the institution for 50 years, shaping every decision, every silence, every fracture, every reconciliation.
A truth that William and Catherine have determined can no longer remain hidden if the monarchy is to survive with integrity. And a truth that Camilla, whose face said everything in that drawing room, has long understood must eventually be faced. To understand the secret, we must first understand what it is not. It is not about Diana, not directly. It is not about infidelity, divorce, or the well-documented tragedies of the 1990s. Those are public knowledge. They've been dissected, debated, mourned, and memorialized. The secret William and Catherine exposed is older than Diana, deeper than marriage, more foundational than any single relationship. It concerns the institutional architecture of succession itself, specifically a series of private memoranda written by Queen Elizabeth II between 1970 and 1976, addressed to her private secretary and copied to then Prince Charles, that document a sustained, deliberate, and ultimately unsuccessful effort by Elizabeth to prepare Charles for kingship through a program of structured mentorship that Charles systematically resisted, rejected, and ultimately abandoned. The memoranda reveal not incompetence or neglect on Elizabeth's part, but a profound, documented failure of transmission. A failure that Charles himself acknowledged in private correspondence, but never publicly, never institutionally, never in a way that allowed the monarchy to learn from it or correct for it. Why does this matter now? Why did William and Catherine choose this moment, this secret, this exposure? Because the failure of transmission documented in those memoranda is not historical, it's operational. It is the reason Charles's reign has been characterized by hesitation, by reactive governance, by institutional drift. It is the reason the transition planning that should have begun decades ago was delayed until crisis forced it. It is the reason William and Catherine have had to build from scratch the preparatory infrastructure that should have been handed to them. And it is the reason Camilla has borne burdens she was never trained for, expected to fill gaps in institutional knowledge that should never have existed. The secret is not merely that Charles failed to prepare. It is that the institution allowed that failure to persist, unexamined, unacknowledged, uncorrected for 50 years. And William and Catherine have determined that the institution cannot move forward while carrying that unexamined weight. The memoranda themselves are extraordinary documents. Written in Elizabeth's precise, economical hand,
They chart a mother's escalating concern about her heir's readiness. The earliest, dated March 1970, notes Charles's resistance to structured instruction and his preference for intuitive learning through experience. Elizabeth writes that she has arranged for senior courtiers to provide weekly briefings on constitutional matters, but Charles attends sporadically and engages reluctantly. By 1972, the tone shifts. Elizabeth records that Charles has expressed frustration with the pace and method of preparation and has requested alternative arrangements. She agrees commissioning a personalized curriculum focused on areas of his interest, agriculture, architecture, urban planning, but notes privately that the core constitutional competencies remain underdeveloped. By 1974, the memoranda become urgent. Elizabeth writes that Charles has ceased regular engagement with preparatory materials and that efforts to re-establish structured mentorship have been met with polite but firm refusal. She expresses concern that the gap between current preparation and future requirement is widening and requests advice from her private secretary on how to proceed without damaging the mother-son relationship. The final memorandum, dated November 1976, is the most devastating. Elizabeth writes, "I have exhausted all avenues of structured preparation. My son has made clear, through word and action, that he will not engage with the institutional framework I have sought to provide. I am left with no choice but to trust that his natural abilities and personal convictions will suffice when the time comes. I pray they will, but I cannot pretend confidence I do not feel. The institution requires a sovereign who understands its machinery. My son understands its spirit. I fear that may not be enough." That memorandum was copied to Charles. He received it, he read it, and he did not respond. Not in writing, not in conversation, not in renewed engagement. He filed it, he moved on. And the gap Elizabeth identified widened into the chasm that has defined his reign. William discovered the memoranda 18 months ago during his own transition planning. He found them not in the official royal archives, but in a private collection held by the estate of Elizabeth's longest-serving private secretary, Sir Martin Charteris, who died in 1999. The collection had been sealed under Charteris's will, with instructions that it be opened only upon the accession of the next sovereign, or upon the request by the direct heir. William requested access. What he found was not just the memoranda, but Charteris's own annotations, marginalia, and private reflections, decades of institutional observation documenting the consequences of Charles's disengagement. Charteris wrote, in a note dated 1985, "The Prince of Wales operates from conviction rather than competence. This is admirable in a private citizen. In a future sovereign, it is dangerous. The Queen knows this. She has tried. She has failed. The failure is not hers alone, but she bears it as if it were." William sat with these documents for weeks. He did not share them immediately. He needed to understand not just what they revealed, but why they mattered now. He consulted historians, constitutional scholars, senior courtiers who had served both Elizabeth and Charles. He built a comprehensive picture of the failure of transmission and its cascading effects across 5 decades of royal governance. And he came to a conclusion that he articulated to Catherine in a single sentence. "We cannot inherit this silence. If we do, we repeat it. And our children will inherit the same gap. The silence ends with us." Catherine agreed, not as his wife, as his partner in sovereignty, as the woman who has spent 2 decades building the institutional competence that Charles never received, as the future queen who understands that preparation is not optional, that transmission is not automatic, that the machinery of the crown must be understood, maintained, and passed on deliberately, or it fails. The decision to expose the secret was not. William and Catherine discussed it for months. They weighed the costs, the potential humiliation to Charles, the pain to Camilla, the public perception of dynastic dysfunction, the risk of undermining confidence in the monarchy at a fragile moment. They weighed the benefits, the opportunity to acknowledge institutional failure honestly, to model accountability, to break the cycle of unexamined succession, to build a foundation of transparency for their own reign. They consulted trusted advisors. They considered timing. They considered framing. And they arrived at a shared conviction that the cost of continued silence exceeded the cost of exposure.
that the monarchy's survival depended not on maintaining the illusion of seamless transmission, but on acknowledging where transmission had failed and committing publicly to doing better. The dinner at Windsor was chosen deliberately. Not a formal audience, not an institutional setting. A family meal. A space where the personal and the institutional could intersect without the performative constraints of either. William and Catherine wanted Charles and Camilla to hear this not as sovereigns receiving a briefing, but as parents receiving a truth from their children. They wanted the exposure to be relational before it was institutional. They wanted Camilla especially to understand that this was not an attack on her husband, but an act of fidelity to the institution they all serve. And they wanted Charles to understand that the exposure was not punishment, but inheritance, a burden their children refused to carry so that his grandchildren might not have to. When William placed the folder on the table, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of 50 years of unspoken acknowledgement, full of Camilla's quiet endurance, full of Charles's private grief over a failure he has never been permitted to name, full of William and Catherine's determination to transform inherited silence into active stewardship. Charles did not open the folder. He looked at William and said quietly, "You've read them all." William said, "Yes." Charles said, "And you understand what they mean?" William said, "I understand what they meant, and what they mean now, for us, for the future, for the institution." Charles nodded slowly. He looked at Camilla. She met his gaze, and in that exchange 50 years of shared silence passed between them. Not shame, not blame. Recognition, mutual recognition of a burden carried together in private, in love, in loyalty, in the belief that some truths were too heavy for the institution to bear. And now, in their son's hands, the belief was being tested. The burden was being transferred. The silence was being broken. Camilla spoke first. Her voice was steady, low, and utterly without defensiveness. She said, "I have always known those documents existed. I have never read them. I did not need to. I have lived their consequences every day of my life beside your father. With machinery he was never taught to operate. I have filled gaps I was never trained to fill. I have carried the weight of preparation that should have been completed decades before I arrived. I have done so willingly, lovingly, without resentment, because I love him, because I believe in him, because I believe in this institution. But I have also known in the quiet hours that the weight should not have been mine to carry, that the gap should not have existed, that the silence around it has cost us all more than anyone outside this room can measure." She paused. She looked at William. "You are right to bring this forward. Your father and I have carried it as long as we can. It is yours now. Handle it with the honesty we could not afford. Handle it with the courage we were not permitted. Handle it for your children, for ours, for the institution we all love." Charles listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He did not minimize. When Camilla finished, he turned to William and said, "Your mother tried. She tried harder than anyone knows, harder than I deserved, harder than I permitted. I was proud. I was stubborn. I believed my instincts would suffice. I was wrong. The memoranda document my failure, not hers, mine. And I have spent my reign compensating for that failure in ways that have been invisible to the public but exhausting to those closest to me. Your stepmother has borne the brunt of that exhaustion. She's done so without complaint, without recognition, without the acknowledgement she deserves. If you are going to expose this, expose it fully. Do not soften it. Do not protect me. Protect the truth. Protect the institution. Protect your children from inheriting my mistakes. I have earned the exposure. Let it serve something greater than my comfort." Catherine spoke next. Her words were measured, compassionate, and institutionally precise. She said, "We are not exposing this to assign blame. We are exposing this to complete the transmission that was interrupted, to acknowledge that preparation is not innate, that competence is not inherited, that the machinery of the crown must be learned deliberately, systematically, with humility.
Your Majesty, your father's memoranda document a failure of transmission, but they also document a mother's love, a sovereign's dedication, an institution's imperfect attempt to prepare its heir. We honour that attempt even as we acknowledge its insufficiency. We honour your service even as we acknowledge its costs. We honour Camilla's endurance even as we acknowledge that she should never have had to endure what she has. This exposure is not an ending. It is a beginning, a commitment to do better, to prepare differently, to transmit completely, to ensure that our children inherit not gaps, but foundations, not silence, but understanding, not burden, but readiness. The conversation continued for 2 hours, not as confrontation, as communion, as four people who love each other and love the institution undertaking the hardest work of institutional life, telling the truth in a space where truth has historically been suppressed. They discussed the memoranda in detail. They discussed the consequences. They discussed the path forward. They discussed how the exposure would be framed publicly, not as scandal, but as institutional learning, not as failure, but as foundation, not as indictment, but as inheritance reclaimed. They agreed on principles: transparency without sensationalism, accountability without humiliation, honesty without harm. They agreed that Camilla's role in bearing the weight of Charles's unpreparedness would be acknowledged not as victimhood, but as extraordinary service. They agreed that Charles's willingness to face this truth would be honoured as an act of sovereign courage. They agreed that William and Catherine's commitment to different preparation would be the legacy of this exposure. The public acknowledgement came 3 weeks later, embedded within William and Catherine's inaugural strategic plan for their future reign. It was not presented as revelation, as continuation, as the next step in an ongoing institutional evolution. The statement read, "As we prepare for our future responsibilities, we have undertaken a comprehensive review of succession planning and institutional preparation across recent reigns. This review has included examination of private archival materials documenting the challenges of royal preparation in the late 20th century. We acknowledge, with gratitude and humility, the efforts of Queen Elizabeth II to prepare her heir, the difficulties encountered in that preparation, and the extraordinary dedication of those who supported the institution through periods of transitional complexity. We commit to building upon these lessons through enhanced, systematic, and transparent preparation frameworks for future generations. We of all who have carried the weight of this institution, including those whose contributions have been less visible than their significance warrants." The statement did not name Charles, did not name Camilla, did not quote the memoranda, but everyone who understood the institution understood what it said. The media passed it carefully. Constitutional commentators recognized its significance. Royal insiders acknowledged its courage. And the public, increasingly attuned to institutional honesty over ceremonial perfection, received it not as weakness, but as strength, as evidence that the monarchy was capable of self-examination, of growth, of learning from its own history rather than merely performing it. Camilla's face, in the weeks following the public acknowledgement, told its own story. Not relief, not vindication. Something quieter, something deeper. The expression of a woman who has carried a weight for decades and has finally been permitted to set it down. Not because the weight was unjust, but because it was no longer hers to carry alone. She continued her duties with the same grace, the same dedication, the same quiet strength. But those closest to her noticed a subtle shift, a lightness, a settling, the settling of someone who has been seen, fully, honestly, without diminishment, without exploitation, seen as she is, a woman who loved a man, served an institution, bore burdens not her own, and endured with dignity. And in being seen, she was freed, not from her role, from the silence that had surrounded it. Charles's response to the public acknowledgement was characteristically private. He did not issue a statement. He did not give an interview. He marked it in the only way that mattered to him, by adjusting his own practice. He began attending transition planning sessions with William and Catherine, not as sovereign overseeing succession, but as participant in institutional learning. He shared his own experiences, his own gaps, his own regrets, with a candour that surprised even his closest advisors. He became, in his final years on the throne, the teacher he had refused to be as heir, Not through structured curriculum, through lived testimony, through the hard-won wisdom of a man who had learned too late that preparation is not optional, that transmission is not automatic, that the machinery of the crown must be understood, maintained, and passed on deliberately. His teaching was not polished. It was raw, honest, uncomfortable, necessary, and it was received by William and Catherine not as instruction, but as gift, the gift of a father's vulnerability offered in service of his children's readiness. What does this story tell us about the monarchy? It tells us that the institution's greatest threat is not external criticism, but internal silence. Silence around failure. Silence around unpreparedness. Silence around the human costs of institutional continuity. The monarchy has survived wars, abdications, scandals, and decades of public skepticism. But it cannot survive the accumulation of unexamined burden. Each generation inherits not just the crown, but the unresolved weight of the previous generation's unspoken struggles. William and Catherine understood this. They understood that inheriting the crown without inheriting the truth about its costs would perpetuate the cycle. That true preparation requires not just learning the machinery, but acknowledging where the machinery has failed. That institutional integrity demands honesty about imperfection. That the monarchy's legitimacy rests not on the illusion of seamless succession, but on the demonstrated commitment to doing better. It tells us that Camilla's role in the monarchy has been fundamentally misunderstood. She has been portrayed as interloper, as consolation, as companion, but her true role has been institutional load-bearing. She has compensated for gaps in preparation that predated her arrival. She has provided stability during transitions that should have been smooth. She has borne the emotional and operational weight of a reign shaped by unaddressed historical deficiencies. Her endurance has not been passive. It has been active, essential, and largely invisible. The exposure of Charles's unpreparedness necessarily illuminates Camilla's extraordinary contribution. Not as adjunct to his reign, but as foundational to its survival. Her face in that drawing room said everything because it contained decades of unacknowledged labour, and in being seen, that labour was finally honoured. It tells us that William and Catherine represent a new model of royal leadership, one rooted in institutional honesty rather than ceremonial mystique. They are not content to inherit the crown as is. They are committed to inheriting it examined, understood, improved. Their willingness to expose Charles's unpreparedness is not disrespect. It is the highest form of respect, for him, for the institution, for the future. It says, "We take this seriously enough to confront its flaws. We honour your service enough to learn from its cost. We love this institution enough to demand better of ourselves than was demanded of you." This is not rebellion. It is stewardship. Stewardship that requires courage, humility, and the willingness to discomfort the present in service of the future. It tells us that secrets, in the context of the monarchy, are not merely private matters. They are institutional liabilities. Every unexamined failure, every unacknowledged burden, every silenced truth accumulates as debt against the institution's future viability. Charles's unpreparedness was not a personal failing alone. It was an institutional debt incurred across decades of silence. William and Catherine's exposure was not an act of familial confrontation. It was an act of institutional debt repayment, acknowledging the debt, naming its sources, committing to different terms going forward. This is how institutions survive, not by pretending perfection, but by practicing accountability. Not by hiding failure, but by learning from it. Not by maintaining silence, but by speaking truth in spaces where truth has been suppressed. What do you think? Were William and Catherine right to expose Charles's unpreparedness, or should some institutional failures remain private to preserve sovereign dignity? Does public acknowledgement of succession deficiencies strengthen or weaken public confidence in the monarchy? Has Camilla's contribution been adequately recognised, or does the institution still fail to value the invisible labour of consorts? Can honest institutional self-examination coexist with the ceremonial mystique that sustains monarchical legitimacy? And what does this story reveal about the relationship between personal truth and institutional survival in systems designed to suppress both? Tell us in the comments below. We read every one, and this story, more than any we have covered, demands the community's judgment. If you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media will not touch, make sure you are subscribed. Turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone who understands that the most important exposures are not scandals, but silence is broken. That the most courageous acts are not revelations, but reckonings. That the most loving gestures are not protections, but truths spoken in spaces where truth has been forbidden. Because in the House of Windsor, the crown passes by law, but truth passes by courage, by folders placed on dinner tables, by faces that say everything, by conversations held in closed rooms, by
Acknowledgements made in public statements, by preparations undertaken differently, by burdens set down, by silences broken, by truth spoken, by institutions examined, by failures acknowledged, by futures built on honesty rather than illusion. Truth is the inheritance. Truth is the exposure. Truth is the acknowledgement. Truth is the preparation. Truth is the transmission. Truth is the silence broken. Truth is the burden set down. Truth is the face that says everything. Truth is Camilla. Truth is Charles. Truth is William. Truth is Catherine. Truth is the institution. Truth is the future. Truth is the courage to speak. Truth is the humility to listen. Truth is the love that demands better. Truth is the stewardship that honors the past by improving the future. Truth is the monarchy surviving not through perfection, but through honesty. Truth is forever. Stay curious, stay informed, stay questioning. And remember, every silence has a cost. Every unexamined failure has a consequence. Every unacknowledged burden has a bearer. Until next time, keep your eyes on the faces that say everything, and your hearts open to the truths that have waited decades to be spoken. Because the face is the silence. The silence is the burden. The burden is the truth. The truth is the exposure. The exposure is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is the preparation. The preparation is the transmission. The transmission is the future. The future is the institution. The institution is the crown. The crown is the stewardship. The stewardship is the courage. The courage is the love. The love is the honesty. The honesty is the survival. The survival is the truth. The truth is the silence broken. The silence broken is the face that says everything. The face is Camilla. Camilla is the endurance. The endurance is the service. The service is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is the honor. The honor is the truth. The truth is the future. The future is the William. William is the preparation. The preparation is the transmission. The transmission is the institution. The institution is the crown. The crown is the stewardship. The stewardship is Catherine. Catherine is the partnership. The partnership is the honesty. The honesty is the survival. The survival is the truth. The truth is the Charles. Charles is the courage. The courage is the acknowledgement. The acknowledgement is the learning. The learning is the teaching. The teaching is the gift. The gift is the future. The future is the truth. But the truth is forever. The memoranda remain in the archives, sealed, protected, accessible to future sovereigns and direct heirs under conditions William and Catherine have established. They are not published, not exhibited, not commodified. They exist as institutional memory, as cautionary record, as testament to a mother's effort, a son's resistance, a consort's endurance, and a grandson's determination to do differently. Their preservation honours Elizabeth's dedication. Their examination honours Charles's willingness to face his own history. Their integration into future preparation honours William and Catherine's commitment to institutional learning. And their continued existence, sealed but accessible, honours the principle that institutional truth must be preserved even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is painful, even when it challenges cherished narratives. Truth is not comfortable. Truth is necessary. And necessity, in the context of institutional survival, outweighs comfort every time. Camilla's legacy is being rewritten in real time, not by biographers, not by historians, by the institution itself, through the acknowledgement embedded in William and Catherine's strategic plan, through the recognition of her load-bearing role, through the honouring of her endurance as institutional service rather than personal sacrifice, through the visibility granted to contributions previously rendered invisible. She is no longer merely the king's wife. She is the woman who carried what the institution failed to provide, who filled gaps she did not create,
who endured burdens she did not earn, who served with dignity in circumstances that tested dignity daily. And in being seen, she is finally fully honoured, not as adjunct, as essential, not as consolation, as cornerstone, not as companion, as pillar. Her face in that drawing room said everything because it contained multitudes. And in being read, those multitudes are finally fully acknowledged. Charles's legacy is being transformed through his willingness to face this truth. He will not be remembered as the perfectly prepared sovereign. He will be remembered as the sovereign who, in his final years, chose honesty over image, accountability over comfort, teaching over performance, vulnerability over invincibility. That choice is his greatest contribution to the institution's future, greater than any policy initiative, greater than any diplomatic achievement, greater than any ceremonial milestone, because it models for future sovereigns that strength lies not in the absence of failure, but in the willingness to acknowledge it. That leadership lies not in the maintenance of illusion, but in the practice of honesty. That legacy lies not in perfection, but in progress. Charles's reign will be judged by many measures, but its most enduring measure may be this, that he permitted his own unpreparedness to become the foundation for his children's readiness, that he allowed his failure to become their lesson, that he transformed his silence into their speech. That is not weakness, that is the hardest kind of strength. The strength that serves the future at the cost of the present. The strength that loves the institution more than the self. The strength that breaks silence so that others need not carry it. William and Catherine's reign, when it comes, will be founded on this exposure, not as scandal, as foundation, as the moment when the monarchy chose honesty over illusion, examination over performance, preparation over assumption. Their commitment to systematic, transparent, and comprehensive succession planning is not bureaucratic exercise. It is moral imperative, born from the recognition that preparation is not optional, that transmission is not automatic, that the machinery of the crown must be understood, maintained, and passed on deliberately. Their reign will be judged by many measures, but its foundational measure will be this, that they refused to inherit silence, that they chose truth over comfort, that they exposed what needed exposing so that their children might inherit readiness rather than burden. That is not rebellion against tradition. It is fidelity to tradition's deepest purpose, the survival of the institution through honest adaptation, through courageous stewardship, through loving accountability, through the willingness to discomfort the present in service of the future. The institution survives, not because it is perfect, because it is capable of examining its imperfections, not because it avoids failure, because it acknowledges failure and learns from it, not because it maintains silence, because it breaks silence when silence becomes liability, not because it protects individuals from truth, because it protects the future through truth. This is the monarchy's resilience, not rigidity, adaptability, not invincibility, honesty, not perfection, progress. William and Catherine's exposure of Charles's unpreparedness is not a crack in the institution's foundation. It is reinforcement, strengthening through examination, securing through acknowledgement, building through honesty. The monarchy survives because it can face itself, because it can speak truth in closed rooms and acknowledge truth in public statements, because it can honour the past while improving the future, because it can love its servants enough to demand better of itself, because it can break silence so that silence does not break it. Goodbye.